The moment my wife told me to get out right now at her mother's Thanksgiving dinner, I knew my marriage was over. What she didn't know was that I'd been planning for this moment for 3 months. "Darren, you're embarrassing us," Kiera hissed across the dining room table, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping her wine glass like a weapon. "Mother asked you a simple question about your career prospects, and you just sit there like a statue." Helena Trenwall, my mother-in-law, dabbed her lips with a cloth napkin and smiled that predatory smile I'd grown to despise. "I simply suggested that perhaps Darren might consider a more ambitious position. Finance managers are so ordinary." I set down my fork carefully. The turkey had turned to cardboard in my mouth anyway. "Helena, I make $68,000 a year managing accounts for a mid-sized firm. That's hardly ordinary." "Compared to what Kiera earns at the agency?" Helena's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Darling, you're holding her back. A woman of her caliber deserves a man who can match her ambition." Kiera's cheeks flushed red, but not from embarrassment, from anger. At me. "Darren, just please. Can you at least try to defend yourself? Show some backbone?" That's when I realized she wasn't defending me. She was angry that I wasn't fighting back hard enough to make this interesting. The whole dinner had been a setup, a carefully orchestrated humiliation, designed to make me the villain of their little family drama. "You know what?" I stood up slowly, folding my napkin and placing it beside my plate. "You're absolutely right, Helena. Kiera does deserve better." I looked directly at my wife, noting how her green eyes widened slightly. She expected me to grovel, to apologize, to beg for acceptance like I had for the past 2 years of our marriage. "Get out," Kiera said quietly. "Just get out right now." "Gladly." I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening." I walked out of that house with my head high, and I didn't look back. What they couldn't see was the small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. Phase 1 was complete. The drive back to our apartment took 25 minutes. I used the time to make 3 phone calls. The first was to Pierce Eldro, my buddy who owned a small rental property downtown. The second was to Big Tony's moving service. The third was to my bank's automated line to check the balance on an account Kiera didn't know existed. By the time I pulled into our parking space, the moving truck was already waiting. "You sure about this timing, Darren?" Pierce asked, stepping out of his beat-up Ford pickup. He was a former Chicago cop turned landlord, and he had the kind of weathered face that had seen everything twice. "Thanksgiving night seems a little dramatic, even for you." "Trust me, Pierce, the timing is perfect." I handed him the first month's rent in cash. "She told me to get out. I'm just being accommodating." Big Tony emerged from the cab of his truck, all 300 pounds of him moving with surprising grace. "Where do you want us to start, boss?" "My office first, then the bedroom. Leave everything that's obviously hers, but anything that could be considered joint property comes with me." I pulled out a detailed list I'd been working on for weeks. "This should cover it." For the next 4 hours, we systematically dismantled my life with Kiera. My books, my computer, my clothes, my grandmother's china that Kiera had always hated anyway. The guys were efficient and professional, treating this like any other job. The beautiful thing about being a finance manager is that you understand documentation. Every receipt, every purchase, every item that could be legally considered mine had been carefully cataloged. When Kiera inevitably tried to claim I'd stolen from her, she'd find that I had paperwork proving ownership of everything I'd taken. By 3 in the morning, the apartment looked like a magazine photo again. Clean, minimalist, expensive. Everything Kiera loved about our life together, minus the one element she'd grown tired of: me. I left my key on the kitchen counter next to a single manila envelope labeled "While I Was Away." Inside were copies of everything I'd discovered about her affair with Damon Firth, her business partner at the advertising agency, hotel receipts from their weekend trips, screenshots of Venmo payments she'd made to him for dinner and client meetings that happened to coincide with nights she'd told me she was working late. Photos I'd taken of his car parked outside our building at 2 in the morning when she thought I was asleep. The real prize was the recording I'd made 3 weeks earlier when she'd pocket-dialed me during one of their conversations. 23 minutes of them planning their next rendezvous and laughing about how oblivious I was. I'd been anything but oblivious. I'd been patient. The last thing I did before leaving was change the emergency contact information on all our joint accounts to Pierce's number. Kiera would discover soon enough that her name had been removed from everything except the lease, which she'd now be responsible for paying alone. My new apartment was a modest one-bedroom above Pierce's auto repair shop. It smelled like motor oil and coffee, and the furniture was second-hand, but it was mine. More importantly, it was paid for with money Kiera knew nothing about. I'd been skimming small amounts from my paychecks for 2 years, depositing them into an account at a different bank. $20 here, $50 there. Lunch money that added up to a nice little nest egg. Not enough to be considered hiding marital assets, but enough to give me a head start on my new life. By the time the sun came up on Black Friday, I was sitting in my new kitchen drinking coffee and waiting for Kiera to discover what I'd left behind. My phone started ringing at 7:30. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I let it ring 15 times before I finally answered. Darren, what the heck is this? Kiera's voice was shrill, panicked. Where are all your things? Where are you? Good morning, Kiera. I'm exactly where you told me to be. Out. I took a sip of my coffee and savored the moment. Did you find my little care package? You son of a... How dare you go through my personal things? Personal things? I laughed, and it felt good. Kiera, you used our joint credit card to pay for those hotel rooms. You transferred money from our shared account to pay for your romantic dinners. You made those calls on a phone plan that I pay for. Nothing about your affair was personal. It was a joint venture, funded by joint assets. The silence on the other end stretched for nearly a minute. I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head as she tried to figure out how much trouble she was in. Darren, listen. We can work this out. What happened last night? Mother was out of line. I was stressed about work, and I took it out on you. Come home, and we'll talk about this like adults. I am home, and we are talking about this like adults. The adult thing to do when your wife is having an affair is to end the marriage. The adult thing to do when your wife humiliates you in front of her family is to remove yourself from the situation. The adult thing to do when someone tells you to get out is to get out. You're being ridiculous. It's not what you think. Really? Because I think you've been sleeping with Damon Firth for at least 6 months. I think you've been using our money to finance your little relationship. I think you've been lying to me every time you claim to be working late or having girls' nights out. Which part am I wrong about? Another long silence. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. The panic was gone, replaced by something colder. What do you want? I want a divorce. I want you to stop pretending this marriage means anything to you, and I want you to understand that actions have consequences. What's that supposed to mean? It means that I'm not the same pushover you married, Kiera. It means that if you want to play games, I'm happy to play along, but I play to win. I hung up and immediately blocked her number. Phase 2 began that afternoon. Damon Firth drove a pristine silver Audi that he parked in the same spot every day outside the agency's downtown office. He was the kind of man who treated his car like a reflection of his personality, sleek, expensive, and completely superficial, which made what I did to it so much more satisfying. I waited until after business hours, when the parking garage was nearly empty. The security cameras had blind spots that I'd identified during my reconnaissance visits over the past month. A little spray paint, a utility knife, and 5 minutes of work transformed his pride and joy into a monument to his character. Cheater, across the windshield in bright red letters. All 4 tires slashed, and as a special touch, I'd stopped by the fish market earlier and left a surprise in his trunk. The smell would be noticeable within hours and unbearable within days. I was 3 blocks away when I called the tip line for the local news station. I'd like to report a story about infidelity at Morrison & Associates advertising agency. You might want to check the parking garage, and you might want to ask Damon Firth's wife what she thinks about her husband's extracurricular activities. The next morning, I sent Mara Firth a carefully worded email from an anonymous account. Nothing threatening, nothing that could be traced back to me. Just a concerned citizen who thought she should know what her husband was up to. I included photos of Damon's car entering and leaving hotels with Kiera. I included copies of the receipts showing him paying for romantic dinners on nights when he'd told his wife he was working late. I included a detailed timeline of their affair, complete with dates and locations. By noon, Mara had filed for divorce. By evening, the story had made the local news. And by the time I went to bed that night, Kiera had tried to call me 37 times from various numbers. I slept better than I had in months. The next phase would be more delicate. Destroying Damon's car and marriage had been satisfying, but it was just the opening move. What I really wanted was to watch their professional lives crumble. Morrison & Associates prided itself on representing family-friendly brands. Their client list included 3 major churches, a children's charity, and 2 family restaurant chains. The kind of clients who didn't appreciate scandals involving their advertising representatives. Which made the anonymous package I sent to their human resources department so much more effective. I'd spent weeks putting together a comprehensive dossier on Kiera and Damon's relationship. Not just the affair itself, but the way it had affected their work. Meetings that had been rescheduled to accommodate their personal time. Client dinners that had been charged to company accounts when no clients were present. Travel expenses for conferences that had never happened. Everything was documented with receipts, photographs, and recorded conversations. The recording was my masterpiece. 23 minutes of Kiera and Damon discussing not just their affair, but their contempt for their clients, their co-workers, and the company itself. Kiera's voice was clearly audible as she mocked the church clients as sanctimonious hypocrites and described the charity work as bleeding heart nonsense. I delivered the package on a Wednesday morning and waited. By Friday afternoon, both Kiera and Damon had been suspended pending a full investigation. The agency moved faster than I'd expected. By Monday morning, Kiera and Damon were both cleaning out their offices under the supervision of security guards. I know this because Tessa Morrison, the agency owner's daughter and Kiera's former best friend, called me in a panic. "Darren, what the heck is going on? Kiera says you've lost your mind, but the evidence they showed us. How long have you known about the affair?" I was sitting in my new apartment, watching the morning news and drinking coffee. "Hello, Tessa. I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. How are you?" "Don't be sarcastic with me. This is serious. Do you have any idea what this is doing to the agency? We've already lost 2 major clients and the others are asking questions." "That sounds like a problem for the agency to solve. Maybe they should have thought about that before they decided to employ people who steal from company accounts to fund their personal relationships. Is that what you think this is about? Money? Isn't it always about money, Tessa? Your friend Kiera spent 2 years telling me I wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't successful enough, wasn't good enough for her. Meanwhile, she was using company resources to cheat on me with her business partner. So yes, I think money is exactly what this is about. She made mistakes, but she doesn't deserve to have her whole career destroyed." "You're right. She doesn't deserve it. She earned it." I hung up and immediately started recording the call. Tessa had always been a gossip, and I suspected she'd be back in touch soon with more information than she intended to share. I was right. She called back an hour later. "Darren, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sound like I was defending what she did. It's just, this is getting out of hand. The media is calling constantly. Helena is threatening to sue everyone. And Kiera, she's not handling this well. What do you mean? She's been staying at her mother's house since you left. She's barely eating, barely sleeping. She keeps saying you've ruined her life, that you're not the man she married. She's right. I'm not the man she married. That man was a doormat who let people walk all over him. That man is gone. What happened to you? I grew a backbone. Kiera always said I should show more ambition. Well, here it is. This isn't ambition, Darren. This is revenge. Sometimes they're the same thing. That conversation gave me an idea. If Kiera was staying with her mother, that meant their apartment was empty most of the time. And if the apartment was empty, that meant I could retrieve a few things I'd forgotten in my hurry to leave. More importantly, it meant I could leave a few things behind. I still had a key to the building, and I knew Kiera's schedule well enough to avoid her. Wednesday afternoons, she had standing appointments with her therapist. That gave me a 2-hour window to work with. The apartment looked exactly the same as when I'd left it, except for the empty spaces where my belongings had been. Kiera had always been obsessive about maintaining appearances, and she clearly wasn't going to let a little thing like her life falling apart interfere with her interior decorating. I wasn't there to vandalize or steal. I was there to plant evidence. Over the past week, I'd been creating a paper trail that would lead investigators to some interesting conclusions about Kiera's financial activities. Nothing illegal, but definitely unethical. Expense reports that didn't quite add up. Receipts for business meetings that had never happened. Credit card statements showing purchases that couldn't be justified as business expenses. I scattered these documents throughout the apartment in places where Kiera would eventually find them, but not immediately. Hidden in books she never read, tucked into folders she rarely opened, slipped between the pages of magazines she kept for appearances. When the agency's investigation expanded, as I knew it would, these documents would surface naturally. And when they did, they would paint a picture of someone who had been systematically defrauding her employer for months. The beautiful part was that most of it was true. I'd simply organized existing evidence in a way that told the story more clearly. As I was leaving, I noticed something interesting. A suitcase by the front door, packed and ready to go. A plane ticket on the kitchen counter. Kiera was planning a trip to Los Angeles, scheduled for the following weekend. A trip that, according to the itinerary, included reservations for 2 at some very expensive restaurants. I took photos of everything and left quietly. That evening, I sent another anonymous tip to the agency's HR department. This time, I included the photos of Kiera's travel plans and suggested they might want to ask how she could afford a luxury vacation when she'd just lost her job. I also sent copies to Damon's divorce attorney and to the local news station that had been covering the story. By Thursday morning, Kiera's vacation had been canceled, and the agency had frozen her final paycheck pending the completion of their investigation. By Friday, Helena Trenwall was on the local news, defending her daughter and claiming that I was a vindictive small man who couldn't handle being married to a successful woman. Watching that interview was the most satisfying 10 minutes of my week. "Mrs. Trenwall," the reporter asked, "are you saying that your son-in-law fabricated evidence of your daughter's affair?" "I'm saying that my daughter is a victim of a man who couldn't accept that she was more successful than he was. He's been planning this attack for months, systematically destroying her reputation because his own ego couldn't handle being married to a woman who earned more money than he did. But the evidence suggests that your daughter was using company resources to fund a personal relationship. The evidence suggests that my daughter was doing her job. She's in advertising. Building relationships with business partners is part of the job description. What about the hotel receipts, the romantic dinners, the recorded conversations?" Helena's face flushed red. "Those conversations were taken out of context. And as for the hotels and dinners, those were legitimate business expenses. If the company has a problem with how their employees conduct business, that's between them and their employees. Mrs. Trenwall, Your daughter was recorded making disparaging comments about the agency's clients, including calling church groups sanctimonious hypocrites and referring to charity work as bleeding heart nonsense. How do you respond to that? I respond by saying that my daughter is entitled to her opinions, and having opinions doesn't make her a criminal. What my former son-in-law has done, on the other hand, is harassment, stalking, and defamation. We're exploring our legal options. The interview ended with Helena storming off camera, and I couldn't stop smiling. Legal options. That was exactly what I'd been hoping she'd say. Helena's threat to pursue legal action was the opening I'd been waiting for. The moment she made that statement on television, she'd committed herself to a course of action that would require her to prove I'd done something illegal. Which I hadn't. Everything I'd done had been carefully planned to stay within the boundaries of the law. I'd documented evidence that was already there. I'd organized information that was already public. I'd exposed behavior that was already happening. The vandalism to Damon's car could never be traced back to me. The anonymous tips to the media and the agency contained no false information. The documents I'd planted in Kiera's apartment were copies of real receipts and reports that she'd actually filed. If Helena wanted to take me to court, she'd have to explain why her daughter had been using company money to fund an affair. She'd have to justify the expense reports and the falsified travel claims. She'd have to defend the recorded conversations where Kiera had mocked her clients and her employer. More importantly, she'd have to do it all in public, under oath, with media coverage. I couldn't have asked for a better outcome. But first, I had one more surprise to deliver. Damon had been staying at a downtown hotel since his wife kicked him out. The same hotel where he'd conducted his affair with Kiera, which showed either a complete lack of imagination or a remarkable sense of irony. Either way, it made him easy to find. I waited in the hotel bar on a Tuesday evening, nursing a beer and reading a newspaper. Damon appeared at 7:30, looking like a man who'd aged 5 years in the past 2 weeks. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. He ordered a double whiskey and sat 3 stools away from me, staring at his reflection in the mirror behind the bar. "Rough week?" I asked casually, not looking up from my newspaper. He turned, and it took him a moment to recognize me. When he did, his face went through several interesting color changes. "You," he said finally. "You son of a—" "Careful, Damon. We're in public." I folded my newspaper and smiled at him. "How's the job search going? I heard Morrison and Associates wasn't willing to provide references." "You destroyed my life. I documented your choices. There's a difference." He stood up, swaying slightly. The whiskey wasn't his first drink of the evening. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you've won?" "I think I've evened the score. You and Kiera thought you could make a fool of me, use my money to fund your little romance, and then humiliate me into disappearing quietly. You were wrong. Kiera loved you. She made a mistake, but she loved you." I laughed, and the sound was harsh enough to make the bartender look up nervously. "Damon, Kiera loved my paycheck and my willingness to be invisible. She loved having a husband who didn't interfere with her social life or her career ambitions. She loved the stability I provided while she played house with you, but she never loved me. You're bitter. I'm realistic, and I'm done being anyone's backup plan." He finished his drink and stood up unsteadily. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is. You just don't realize it yet." He left the bar muttering threats under his breath, and I ordered another beer. The bartender, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, shook her head sympathetically. "Ex-husband?" she asked. "Ex-wife's boyfriend." "Ah, that's always messy." "Not anymore." The next morning, I received a call from a lawyer representing Helena Trenwall. They wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss a potential resolution to our dispute. I agreed to meet them that afternoon at their downtown office. The law firm of Brennan, Walsh & Associates occupied 2 floors of a glass tower overlooking the lake. The reception area was all marble and mahogany, designed to intimidate people who couldn't afford their services. I wasn't intimidated. I was prepared. Helena was waiting in the conference room with 2 lawyers and what appeared to be a private investigator. She looked older than she had on television, and her usual perfect composure showed cracks around the edges. "Mr. Holloway," the lead attorney began, "I'm James Brennan. We represent Mrs. Trenwall and her daughter in this matter. We're hoping we can reach an amicable resolution without the need for lengthy litigation." "What kind of resolution did you have in mind?" "We're prepared to offer you $50,000 in exchange for a public apology and a signed agreement that you'll cease all harassment of our clients." I pretended to consider the offer. $50,000 is generous. What exactly would I be apologizing for? "For the systematic campaign of harassment and defamation you've conducted against Mrs. Kiera Holloway and Mr. Damon Firth, for the vandalism of Mr. Firth's vehicle, for the false and misleading information you've provided to the media and to Morrison and Associates." "I see. And you can prove that I'm responsible for all of these things?" The lawyers exchanged glances. Helena leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "We know it was you, Darren. Who else would have access to Kiera's personal information? Who else would have motive to destroy her career?" "Mrs. Trenwall, anyone with access to public records, social media, and basic observation skills could have gathered the information that's been released. As for motive, your daughter and her boyfriend made enemies of their co-workers, their clients, and their employer. I'm just one of many people who had reason to dislike them. But you're the only one who benefited from their downfall." "How exactly have I benefited? I lost my wife, my home, and my comfortable lifestyle. If this was about personal gain, I did a terrible job." The private investigator spoke up for the first time. "We have evidence that you've been planning this for months. Bank records showing you've been hiding money from your wife, rental agreements that were signed before your separation, moving truck receipts dated the same day you left your wife." I smiled. "You mean I was prepared for the inevitable end of my marriage? You mean I was smart enough to protect myself financially when I discovered my wife was cheating? You mean I had the foresight to arrange alternative housing before I was kicked out of my own home? Gentlemen, that's not evidence of a criminal conspiracy. That's evidence of good planning." The room fell silent. Helena's face was getting redder by the minute. "You arrogant little man. You think you can destroy my daughter's life and walk away? You think there won't be consequences?" "Mrs. Trenwall, the only consequences I'm worried about are the ones your daughter brought on herself. She chose to have an affair. She chose to use company money to fund it. She chose to mock her clients and her employer. She chose to humiliate me in front of your family. I didn't destroy her life. I simply made sure everyone else could see what she'd already done." I stood up and straightened my tie. "Gentlemen, Mrs. Trenwall, thank you for the generous offer, but I'll have to decline. I haven't done anything wrong, and I don't apologize for things I haven't done." "You'll regret this," Helena called after me as I walked toward the door. "No, Mrs. Trenwall, I really won't." The lawsuit was filed 3 days later. Helena and Kiera were seeking damages for harassment, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interference with business relationships. They wanted $200,000 in damages and a permanent restraining order. It was exactly what I'd been hoping for. The moment they filed that lawsuit, they'd committed themselves to proving their case in court, which meant they'd have to testify under oath about Kiera's affair, the misuse of company funds, and the circumstances surrounding our separation. More importantly, it meant that everything I'd discovered about their activities would become part of the public record. I hired Patricia Wong, a divorce attorney with a reputation for aggressive tactics and a willingness to play hardball. Our first meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. "Mr. Holloway," Patricia said, reviewing the lawsuit papers, "this is either the stupidest thing your wife has ever done or the smartest thing you've ever done." "What do you mean?" "I mean that by filing this lawsuit, they've opened themselves up to discovery. We can subpoena their financial records, their phone records, their employment files, everything, and we can depose everyone involved under oath. Including Helena? Especially Helena. If she wants to claim that you've damaged her daughter's reputation, she'll have to explain what that reputation was worth before you allegedly damaged it. We spent the next 2 hours going through the evidence I'd collected. Patricia was impressed by the thoroughness of my documentation and the care I'd taken to stay within legal boundaries. "You've been planning this for a while," she observed. "I've been preparing for the inevitable. There's a difference. Not much of one in this case. The question is, what do you want to achieve? Do you want to settle this quietly, or do you want to take it all the way to trial? I want them to understand that actions have consequences. I want Kiera to face the reality of what she's done, and I want Helena to learn that she can't bully people without pushback." "Trial it is then. Fair warning, this is going to get ugly." "It's already ugly. Now it's going to be ugly in public." The discovery phase began immediately. Patricia subpoenaed records from Morrison and Associates, from the hotels where Kiera and Damon had stayed, from the restaurants where they'd dined, and from every financial institution they'd used. What we found was even worse than I'd suspected. Kiera hadn't just been using company money to fund her affair. She'd been systematically padding her expense accounts for over a year, claiming reimbursement for meals, travel, and entertainment that had never happened or had been personal, rather than business-related. The agency's internal investigation had uncovered nearly $30,000 in questionable expenses, all tied to Kiera's accounts. But the real revelation came when we subpoenaed Helena's financial records. For the past 3 years, Helena had been receiving monthly payments from Kiera's checking account. $500 every month listed as family support on Kiera's bank statements. The problem was that Helena didn't need family support. She owned her own home, had a comfortable pension from her late husband's insurance business, and had never mentioned financial difficulties to anyone. When Patricia dug deeper, we discovered that Helena had been using the money to fund a gambling habit: online poker, casino trips, sports betting. She'd lost nearly $18,000 in the past year alone. Kiera had been stealing from her employer to support her mother's gambling addiction while simultaneously funding her affair with Damon. "This just keeps getting better," Patricia said, reviewing the bank records. "Your wife was essentially running a money laundering operation, using company funds to support her mother's illegal gambling debts. Is that enough to win the lawsuit?" "It's enough to destroy their credibility completely. But I think we can do better than just win. I think we can make this so public and so embarrassing that they'll wish they'd never heard your name." The depositions were scheduled for the following month. Kiera would be questioned first, followed by Damon, then Helena. Each session would be recorded and could potentially be used in court. But before the depositions could take place, something unexpected happened. Tessa Morrison called me again. "Darren, you need to stop this. The agency is talking about filing criminal charges against Kiera for embezzlement. If this goes to trial, she could end up in prison." "That's not my decision to make, Tessa. If the agency thinks she committed a crime, that's between them and the district attorney. But you could make it go away. You could settle the lawsuit and convince the agency to drop the investigation." "Why would I do that?" "Because despite everything that's happened, she's still your wife, and because Helena is talking about doing something drastic if this doesn't stop." "What kind of something?" "I don't know, but she's desperate, and desperate people do stupid things." That conversation worried me more than I wanted to admit. Helena had always been dramatic, but the financial pressure from her gambling debts combined with the public humiliation of the lawsuit might push her to do something genuinely reckless. I decided to take precautions. I installed security cameras around my apartment and my car. I varied my daily routine and started parking in different locations. I made copies of all my evidence and stored them in multiple locations. Most importantly, I prepared for the possibility that Helena might try to escalate the situation beyond the legal system. I didn't have to wait long. On a Thursday evening, as I was leaving my office, I found Damon waiting by my car. He looked even worse than he had at the hotel bar, and there was something dangerous in his eyes. "We need to talk," he said. "I don't think we do. Helena's lost her mind. She's talking about hiring people to make you disappear. She's convinced that if you're gone, all of this will go away too. That's not how lawsuits work, Damon. Try explaining that to a crazy woman who's about to lose everything. Look, I know you hate me, and you have every right to, but this has gone far enough. Kiera's talking about hurting herself. Helena's talking about hurting you, and I'm caught in the middle of a situation that's spiraling out of control. What do you want me to do about it? End this. Drop the lawsuit, take whatever settlement they're offering, and walk away. So you can all go back to your comfortable lives while I disappear quietly? I don't think so. Then at least be careful. Helena's not stable right now, and she has enough money to cause serious problems for you." He walked away without another word, leaving me standing in the parking garage with a chill running down my spine. That night, I called Patricia and told her about the conversation. "We need to move faster," she said. "If they're getting desperate enough to make threats, they might try to destroy evidence or intimidate witnesses. I'm going to ask the court to expedite the deposition schedule." "How much faster? How does next week sound?" "Perfect." The depositions were held in a sterile conference room at Patricia's law firm. Kiera arrived with her own attorney, looking pale and nervous. She'd lost weight since I'd last seen her, and her usually perfect appearance showed signs of strain. Helena sat beside her daughter like a bodyguard, radiating hostility and barely controlled rage. Patricia began with basic questions about the timeline of our marriage and separation. Kiera's answers were careful, rehearsed, designed to minimize her responsibility for everything that had happened. "Mrs. Halloway," Patricia said, "when did your relationship with Mr. Damon Firth become romantic in nature?" "I object to the characterization of their relationship as romantic," Kiera's attorney interrupted. "Fine. When did your relationship with Mr. Firth become physical?" Kiera's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "I don't recall the exact date. Was it before or after your husband discovered evidence of your affair?" "There was no affair." Patricia slid a stack of photographs across the table. Hotel security footage, restaurant receipts, Venmo payment records. "Mrs. Halloway, these documents suggest that you and Mr. Firth spent significant time together in private settings, often during business hours, and that you paid for many of these encounters using funds from accounts you shared with your husband. How do you explain this?" "Those were business meetings. Business meetings that required hotel rooms? Sometimes we needed privacy to discuss sensitive client matters. And the romantic dinners? The weekend trips? The intimate text messages?" Kiera's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand. Darren he wasn't meeting my needs. He was content to stay in the same job, live in the same apartment, never push himself to achieve anything more. I needed someone who understood ambition." "So you decided to find that someone while remaining married to Mr. Halloway?" "I made mistakes, but I never meant for anyone to get hurt." Patricia spent the next hour walking through the financial evidence, the expense account padding, the falsified travel reports, the money transfers to Helena. With each document, Kiera became smaller in her chair. "Mrs. Halloway, over the past 18 months, you've claimed approximately $30,000 in business expenses that appear to be personal in nature. How do you explain this?" "I was working long hours. Sometimes personal and business activities overlapped. Like when you claimed a business dinner on the same night that hotel security cameras show you and Mr. Firth checking into a room together." Kiera's attorney called for a break. During the recess, I watched Helena pace the hallway like a caged animal, muttering under her breath and shooting venomous looks in my direction. When we resumed, Patricia turned her attention to the money transfers. "Mrs. Halloway, why were you sending $500 a month to your mother?" "She needed help with expenses." "What kind of expenses?" "I don't know. personal things. Were you aware that your mother was using this money to fund gambling activities? The question hit like a bomb. Kiera's face went white, and she turned to stare at Helena, who had suddenly gone very still. What? Patricia slid another stack of documents across the table. Bank records, casino receipts, online gambling transaction histories. Mrs. Halloway, your mother has lost nearly $18,000 gambling in the past year alone. The money you've been sending her, money that appears to have come from falsified expense claims, has been going directly to casinos and online betting sites. Kiera looked like she was going to be sick. Mother, is this true? Helena's mask finally slipped completely. You have no right to judge me. You have no idea what it's like to watch your daughter throw her life away on a worthless man while you sit helplessly and watch. So, you decided to steal from my employer to fund your gambling? I decided to accept help from my daughter during a difficult time. What she chose to tell her employer about the source of that money was her decision. The room erupted. Kiera started crying. Helena started shouting. The attorneys started objecting to everything simultaneously, and I sat back and watched the family that had spent 2 years making me feel inadequate tear itself apart in front of a court reporter. When order was finally restored, Patricia had one more surprise. Mrs. Halloway, are you familiar with the Morrison & Associates Employee Handbook section regarding conflicts of interest and ethical conduct? Yes. And you were aware that romantic relationships between business partners require disclosure to management? Yes. And you were aware that using company resources for personal activities is grounds for immediate termination? Yes. And you were aware that falsifying expense reports is considered fraud under Illinois state law? Kiera's attorney objected, but the damage was done. Patricia had established that Kiera had knowingly violated company policy, state law, and her fiduciary duty to her employer. The deposition ended with Kiera in tears and Helena threatening to sue everyone in the room. Damon's deposition the following day was shorter but equally devastating. He admitted to the affair, confirmed the details of their financial arrangements, and acknowledged that he'd known their relationship violated company policy. More importantly, he revealed that the agency was considering filing criminal charges against both of them for fraud and embezzlement. Helena's deposition was the final act of the drama. Patricia had saved the best for last. The gambling records, the money transfers, the pattern of financial dependency that had driven Kiera to steal from her employer. Mrs. Trenwall, when did you first ask your daughter for financial assistance? I never asked for anything. She offered to help. Help with what, specifically? General expenses. Mrs. Trenwall, you own your home outright. You receive a pension of $4,000 per month, and you have no significant debts other than gambling losses. What general expenses required $500 per month in additional support? Helena's face turned red. My financial affairs are private. Not when they're funded by embezzled money, they're not. The questioning continued for 3 hours. By the end, Patricia had established that Helena had been pressuring Kiera for money to cover gambling debts, that she'd known the money was coming from questionable sources, and that she'd encouraged Kiera to hide the payments from me. Mrs. Trenwall, in your television interview, you claimed that your son-in-law was a vindictive, small man who couldn't handle being married to a successful woman. Do you still stand by that characterization? Absolutely. Even knowing that your daughter was stealing from her employer to fund both an extramarital affair and your gambling addiction, my daughter is a victim of circumstances beyond her control. What circumstances would those be? Being married to a man who didn't appreciate her worth. Patricia smiled coldly. Mrs. Trenwall, your daughter's worth to her employer was approximately negative $30,000. Her worth to her husband was apparently enough for him to support her career ambitions, while she used his money to cheat on him. Her worth to you was $500 per month in gambling money. I think Mr. Halloway understood her worth perfectly. The deposition ended with Helena storming out of the room, shouting threats and obscenities. 3 days later, Kiera and her attorneys called to request a settlement conference. They were offering to drop the lawsuit in exchange for my agreement not to cooperate with any criminal investigation. I declined. 2 days after that, Morrison and Associates announced that they were filing criminal charges against both Kiera and Damon for embezzlement and fraud. The story made the front page of the business section and led the evening news. Helena appeared on television again, this time to announce that she was disowning her daughter and moving to Florida to start fresh. And Damon, faced with the prospect of criminal prosecution and a bitter divorce, decided to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. The house of cards had finally collapsed completely. I was in my apartment that evening, watching the news coverage and drinking a beer, when my phone rang. It was Kiera. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello, Kiera." "Darren." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Are you happy now?" "I'm satisfied. I'm going to prison. My career is over. My mother has abandoned me. My friends won't return my calls. You've destroyed everything I worked for." "No, Kiera. You destroyed everything you worked for. I just made sure everyone could see what you'd done. I loved you. Despite everything, I did love you. Maybe you did, in your own way. But you loved yourself more. And you loved the idea of what you thought you deserved more than you loved what you actually had. What happens now? Now you face the consequences of your choices, just like everyone else has to. And us? There is no us, Kiera. There hasn't been for a long time." I hung up and turned off my phone. The next morning, I filed for divorce. 6 months later, Kiera pleaded guilty to embezzlement and was sentenced to 18 months in minimum security prison. Damon received a similar sentence. Helena disappeared to Florida and was arrested 3 months later for running an illegal gambling operation out of a retirement community. The agency settled with their insurance company and managed to avoid bankruptcy, though they lost several major clients and had to lay off a third of their staff. And me? I got a promotion at work, moved to a better apartment, and started dating a woman who thinks ambition means working hard at something you care about, not stepping on other people to get what you want. Sometimes I think about that Thanksgiving dinner, about the moment when Kiera told me to get out. I wonder what would have happened if I'd apologized, if I'd tried to make peace with Helena, if I'd been the man they wanted me to be. But then, I remember the look on Kiera's face when she realized that her perfect plan had backfired completely. I remember Helena's expression when she discovered that her gambling debts were about to become public knowledge. I remember Damon's shock when he realized that actions actually do have consequences. And I smile. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's just making sure that the truth comes out. And sometimes, if you're very patient and very careful, the truth is more devastating than anything you could have planned.